Hi everyone, it is today World Alzheimer's Day. I have to ask myself why there should be a specific day for Alzheimer's as opposed to dementia. And I think maybe it's a good point to start there and mention that Alzheimer's is a type of dementia. Most people know that, but I think it's good to just clarify that dementia is an umbrella syndrome that incorporates a number of diseases of the brain, of which Alzheimer's is one. But allow me to read to you the World Health Organization's definition of dementia. So, dementia is a syndrome, usually of a chronic or progressive nature, in which there is deterioration in cognitive function, that is, the ability to process thought, beyond what might be expected from normal aging. It affects memory, thinking, orientation, comprehension, calculation, learning capacity, language, and judgment. Consciousness is never affected. The impairment in cognitive function is commonly accompanied and occasionally preceded by deterioration in emotional control, social behavior, or motivation. Now, that is a mouthful, and quite a disturbing mouthful. But I want to focus our attention on one little sentence that is thrown into the definition and is often not really paid enough attention to. And that is the sentence that says consciousness is not affected. Now, for many people, this is very problematic because what do we mean by consciousness? We know when someone loses consciousness. We know that we can speak of someone being not very conscious or someone is unconscious, but what does it really mean? Now, I'm not going to go into a lot of biomedical detail, which in itself is fascinating because it's something that a lot of people seem to skirt around and don't want to pay too much attention to, because it sort of veers into the sphere of being a little bit airy-fairy. But what does the World Health Organization mean when it says that consciousness is not affected? For me, in all the years that I've worked with people living with dementia, this is the essential bit that we should never forget. And that is that in spite of the deterioration, in spite of the atrophy in the brain, as human beings, we remain conscious in spite of dementia. Remaining conscious does not necessarily mean that I will be able to call you by your name, or that I will know that it's Tuesday. Consciousness goes way beyond that. To me, consciousness is a knowing that does not always need to be expressed, but a very, very deep knowing and a very deep connectedness. I've so often heard families say, oh, well, we don't go and visit anymore because she really is not our mother anymore. Or they will say, well, we lost her to dementia once and now, we lost her again when she died. That flies in the face of what the World Health Organization says and what I have seen over and over and over again in people living with dementia, that whilst they may not be able to articulate thoughts or emotions verbally, that their consciousness is intact. In fact, one of the most beautiful stories come from research where a resident living with dementia was in a wheelchair wheeled to the dining room table where she was seated at her place. The caregiver put the plastic bib, as they do, God forbid, around her neck and left her to her plate of food. This lady, who could no longer communicate verbally, was sitting there looking at her plate of food. And then suddenly she reached from behind her bib, took out a string of pearls and hung them over her bib. Consciousness is never affected. Consciousness is part of our being in the world. The consciousness of being a mother or a father or a grandmother or a grandmother never fades. The ability to remember the grandchildren's names might fade. But that knowing, that emotional knowing when your grandchildren come to visit you, is so deeply seated in our being that it is never affected by dementia. So my message today is that we start looking at people differently. As Dr. Elpower says, that we should change our minds about people whose minds have changed. They are still our mother or father, grandmother, grandfather. They are still a wife, a husband. Let's not just see the disease. Let us see the person with a story, and the person whose consciousness is not affected. Let's celebrate the diversity of people with different abilities, now and every other day of the year.